reminded of. We all need to hear that, don't we? Thank you, Jennifer and Pastor Lynette. There was a group of children that was asked about Father's Day, what their impressions were of Father's Day, what they thought about it, and so forth. And there were several answers given, and then one kid raised his hand and said that Father's Day is just like Mother's Day, only it doesn't cost as much. So I'll just leave that there and mention to you today that we're going to talk about leaving a legacy. And as is often the case on sermons that fall on a Mother's Day or Father's Day or things like that, this sermon isn't just for fathers, but it's for everyone. Even if you're not a mother or a father, you are still going to leave a legacy, and it's important for all of us to consider the kind of legacy we're going to leave behind. So we're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning at verse 1. We're going to look at the first 3 verses. He says, "Now this is the commandment, and these are the statutes and judgments which the Lord your God has commanded to teach you, that you may observe them in the land which you are crossing over to possess, that you may fear the Lord your God, to keep all his statutes and commandments which I command you." Notice this next part in particular. "You and your son and your grandson, all the days of your life." God's teaching you all of this for you, your son, your grandson, all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. "Therefore hear, O Israel, and be careful to observe it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord God of your fathers has promised you, a land flowing with milk and honey." As we think about leaving a legacy, it's important to remember that a legacy is not just what people may say about you after you're dead and gone. A lot of times that's how people think about a legacy. Well, it's what people say about them after they're gone. And while that certainly may be a part of it, there's certainly more to it than that. Because when I talk about legacy today, what I'm referring to more is impact, influence. The type of influence that you have, not just on people today, but then even beyond your years here on earth. In Hebrews 11 and verse 4, when it speaks about Abel, it says that though he was dead, he still speaks. Now that's not talking about in some ghost kind of way, but it talks about his influence. That even though he was dead, his influence was living on. Wouldn't you love to leave that kind of a legacy? Or even years after you're gone, people are saying their influence is still with me. I can still hear their voice speaking to me, the things that they taught me. Because I'm sure you feel that way about people who have gone before you in your life. Maybe a parent or a grandparent or a sibling or an uncle or aunt, somebody who taught you, mentored you, and led you. Their influence continues in your life. And the question is not whether or not you're going to leave a legacy. The question is, what kind of a legacy are you going to leave? So it's not an if question, like, should I decide to leave a legacy, or will I leave a legacy, or should I? Because you will. Everybody leaves a legacy. Everybody has influence. Everybody has impact. So the question is, are you going to leave a good legacy, a positive legacy, or a negative one? So you might as well make up your mind now. You're going to leave one. So let's go ahead and determine that we're going to leave a good legacy. Let's build those blocks and keep building a good legacy. One important matter to consider before I really get into the crux of this message. It's not a good idea to wait until you're on your deathbed to start thinking about your legacy. All right? Just not a good idea. Because a legacy takes time to develop. It's laying one stone upon another. It's a daily thing that builds one idea, one moment upon another. And so waiting until your deathbed to say, well, I want to now start thinking about what kind of legacy I'm going to leave behind, because that's just not going to cut it. You've been working on a legacy already. Maybe not consciously, but you have been with the influence that you've had on people. Well, today we're going to take a fresh look at the kind of legacy that we are building, and how you can keep or begin or maybe reconstruct the kind of legacy that you're building to make sure that it's a positive, good, godly, strong legacy. So I want to lay out 3 thoughts to keep in mind as we build a legacy. All right, number 1, recognize that your life is not about you. This passage in Deuteronomy, God shows us that our first responsibility is to Him, to keep His statutes and His judgments, His commandments. And then He says to teach them to your children and to your children's children. It kind of goes on. You teach your children, then your children teach your children's children. And it's a continual passing of the baton. And so we realize in this passage that our lives are not about us, but that we have the opportunity to impact the lives of many people around us on a regular basis. And we need to take that responsibility very, very seriously, because your life is not just about you. And once in a while, I'll read about somebody or hear somebody say something like, if I want to go to hell, then that's my business. I don't know if you've ever heard anyone say that, or maybe read that somewhere where somebody says, if I want to go to hell, that's my business. Now that's true to a point. It's true that if you decide to reject Jesus Christ from your life, reject His offer of salvation, and go to hell, it is true to some degree that that's your business. I mean, it's your choice. No one else can force Christ upon you. He won't force Himself upon you. If you choose to reject Him from your life and go to hell, to a large degree, yeah, that's your business. But if that is your choice, understand that it's not just your business, but it could impact many, many other people around you as well. Because other people are going to be influenced by your decisions. It is a matter of extreme blindness to fail to see or to refuse to see that the choices that you make, particularly when it comes to spiritual choices related to God, impact a host of other people around you. And your decision to follow Christ could be the impetus by which other people come to know Him as Savior and make the decision to follow the Lord Jesus and receive salvation and go to heaven forever. And wouldn't it be something to be in heaven one day and to find a group of people who come up to you and say, I am here, either directly or indirectly as a result of your influence in my life. Now, it could even be somebody you never met before, because it could be that you taught your child who knew somebody who influenced them, and maybe in an indirect way, they're in heaven because of you. Maybe you never knew they even got saved. But because of your influence, one way or another, they came to know Jesus. Wouldn't it be something? And I believe that's going to happen. I believe that's going to happen. That we'll get to heaven and we'll find out that we had influence on people that we don't even realize. Or maybe somebody that you had an influence on had an influence on hundreds of other people. And they got saved as a result of that. Because your life's not just about you. On the other hand, wouldn't it be awful to go to hell and then find out that other people are there in part because of you? Because you rejected Christ, because you pushed Him out of your life, and others around you did the same. Because you didn't follow Jesus, they didn't follow Jesus. Because you didn't want anything to do with God, they didn't want anything to do with God. How heartbreaking and tragic that would be. And so understand, your legacy begins with recognizing that your responsibility is not just about your own personal life and your own self-centeredness, but it's about your relationship with God, first of all, and being right with Him and keeping His words, as it says in Deuteronomy 6, and then in influencing others around you. And as we think about it on this Father's Day, we think about our sons and daughters, who in turn will influence their sons and daughters. And that influence lives on. So recognize that your life isn't about you. If you want to build a godly legacy, we've got to start there. Secondly, Live with the big picture in mind. What I mean by that is, as you raise your kids, and as you influence others, recognize that it's not just about today, but it's about a lifetime. And it's about a bigger picture than just the moment. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, it talked about teaching our sons and our grandchildren, and it talked about their lives as a whole. It says that it may be well with you and that you may live a long life. It's talking about a big picture. It's not just, don't just think about today, but think about life as a whole. What I'm getting at is this. When it comes to making time for your children, make time for your children. So many times we look at just the moment. Well, I'm in the middle of this TV show right now. Or I'm reading this article on my computer and I just don't want to set my computer aside to spend time with my kid who has a question or wants me to play a game. Or, well, I have work to do and just we're always kind of under that pressure, of doing this. And we're looking at the moment. And I understand there are times when other things may be requiring our attention, but when that becomes the routine, and we're always putting other things before our kids, and we're never taking time for them, they catch on. And they come to realize, oh, I must not be all that important. Because we're so focused in the moment, we're not seeing the big picture. Many of you have heard of Josh McDowell, who was an author and conference speaker. And he's written a number of books. And he wrote a book years ago called How to Be a Hero to Your Kids. And in that book, he actually admitted something about when his kids were small. And he said his wife spoke to him one time. I imagine she must have done this in a very loving, kind way. But she said to him, she said, Josh, all your life you're going to have contracts and deadlines. And he's a speaker, he's a writer, and she said, you're always going to have projects that you're working on. But you're not always going to have a 2-year-old who wants to climb up into your lap and ask you questions and show you his new ball. Because, he was a writer, I would imagine he worked at home a lot, And she was helping him to see. She said, if we make time for them now, they'll make time for us later. That's not the only reason we do it, but she made that point, and it is true. And that kind of got into him, a little bit. And he realized, sometimes you just need to set the computer aside. Sometimes you need to turn the television off. Sometimes you need to say no to one thing or another so you can have time for your children. You got to live with the big picture in mind. And 20 years from now, what kind of relationship do you want to have with your kids? Well, it begins when they're little, making time for them. See the big picture. Back in the mid-'70s, there was a song that came out called Cats in the Cradle. And a lot of y'all know that song, I'm sure. And I've referenced the song before in sermons, but I've never done what I'm going to do this morning. No, I'm not going to sing it to you. You say, praise the Lord. But I am going to walk you through it. And I'm going to share the lyrics with you. Maybe not word for word exact, but to get the gist of it. And Harry Chapin is the guy who recorded this song. And in December of 1974, it went to #1 on the charts here in the United States. Harry Chapin, who wrote this song, his wife actually recommended it to him. He was away when his kid was born, and this kind of got into his head, And he actually said one time, this song scares me to death. Because he didn't want what the song describes to happen to him. The verse 1 says, my child arrived just the other day. There were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away. And he was talking before I knew it. And as he grew, he'd say, I'm going to be just like him. I'm going to be just like my dad. And in the chorus of the song, the son says, when are you coming home, Dad? The dad says, well, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, son. We'll have a good time then. Verse 2, My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, "Thanks for the ball, Dad. Come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw?" I said, "Not today. I got a lot to do." He said, "That's okay." My child walked away, but his smile never dimmed. He said, "I'm going to be just like him. I'm going to be just like my dad." And then again in the chorus, he says, "When you coming home, Dad?" "I don't know, son, but we'll get together. We're going to have a good time." Well, then in the third verse, the tables are turned. And the son now, well, you'll see what happens. Well, he came from college just the other day, so much like a man, I just had to say, "Son, I'm proud of you. Can you sit for a while?" He shook his head. And he said with a smile, "What I'd really like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys. See you later. Can I have them, please?" This time in the chorus, it's the father saying to the son, "When you coming home, son?" "I don't know when. But we'll get together then, Dad. You know we'll have a good time then." And then in verse 4, it's really sad. "I've long since retired. My son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, 'I'd like to see you if you don't mind.' He said, 'I'd love to, Dad, if I can find the time. But my new job's a hassle, and the kids have the flu. But it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you.'" And then the last line is heartbreaking. "As I hung up the phone, it occurred to me. He had grown up just like me. My boy was just like me." I was 11 years old when that song went to number 1 on the Billboard charts in 1974. And even though it was going to be 16 years before I would become a dad, I made up my mind as an 11-year-old boy that was not going to be me. And I had 2 strong influences. One was my own dad, who was at about every baseball game I ever played, and even a little football. I could count on the hand how many times he may have missed. And the other influence was that song. And I thought, I'm going to be like my father. And I'm not going to be like the dad in that song. And I can't stand here today and say that Cindy and I was at every single game or every single concert or musical performance, but it was rare that we missed because of that song and because of the example that my own dad set. I knew how much it meant to me. And it's keeping the big picture in mind. It's keeping the big picture in mind. If you have kids that are still growing up, man, take time for them. Take time to play games with them, read to them, be with them, take trips with them. Yeah, hold them in your arms as they sleep in church. I used to do that with my parents. And take time. Because, as is often said, love is spelled T-I-M-E when it comes to kids. That's important. So live with the big picture in mind. Then number 3, pay attention to detail. Pay attention to detail. God said to keep all his commandments, all his statutes, and all his judgments. He didn't say some of them, but he didn't say to compromise them. He didn't say to, shade the truth a little bit. He said to keep his commandments. And when I think about paying attention to detail, what I'm talking about primarily here is to listen to truth and to live it out. I know we're not perfect as parents, as has been said earlier. We're not ever going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes, but when it comes to the morality and the ethics and the principles, remember always that our kids are watching, that little eyes are watching us, and they're going to learn as much from our actions, if not more, from our actions than just our words. So I'm talking about questions of principles, honesty, ethics, morality, things of that nature. For example, if you're at a restaurant and you get the check and you realize, wow, they didn't charge us for our beverages. You know, you're talking like $3 each for 4 people. That's $12. Hey, it's my lucky day. A lot of people do that. They don't tell the truth. They say, they reason it out by saying, well, it's their fault. They should pay more attention. But there are 2 things I would say in response to that. One, you ordered those beverages and you enjoyed them, so you should pay for them. Secondly, golden rule is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you were the waiter, you wouldn't want to get in trouble for neglecting to do that. And so you should be honest and you should be upfront and pay for what you ordered. But a lot of people would teach their children just by their negligence or by saying, hey, we don't have to say anything. They're teaching their children to be dishonest. They're teaching their children to steal. It's the same thing. Anytime we shade the truth, whenever I talk to Christian people, I think, okay, you would never rob a bank, and you would never slash somebody's tires, and you would never take a baseball bat and slug somebody up the head with it. But sometimes we'll do little things, white lies, little things of deceit and dishonesty that we know we'll never get caught on. And our kids are watching, and they know it's dishonest. Somebody wrote this little piece. They said, little Johnny was about 7 years old when his dad and he were in a restaurant, and he found somebody had left their wallet. Had ID in it and a good amount of cash. And the father just slipped it in his pocket. When his son said something to him, he said, well, hey, he should have been more careful. When Johnny was 10 years old, he broke his glasses. He overheard his mother talking on the telephone to the insurance company, telling them that his glasses were stolen because she thought they might be more likely to cover the cost if she reported them stolen rather than broken. When Johnny was in high school and playing football, his coach taught him a way where he could hold the defender in such a way that the referee wouldn't see and he could get away with it. He won't get penalized that way. Well, then Johnny went off to college. Johnny found out that for a certain price, you could actually buy answers to some professors' tests. Or you could actually pay somebody else to write your paper for you. Thought that sounded like a pretty good scheme. But then when Johnny got found out and he was expelled, his mom and dad were shocked. And they were like, where did he learn such behavior? Not realizing that they themselves are the ones that taught him. You see, parents, a lot of times it's the little things that would never land us in jail, never put us in court, and never get you in trouble in any way. But there are things that are still dishonest, things that are still underhanded and low, that we have to be careful about because our kids are watching. And if it's okay for mom and dad to do it, then it must be okay. So look at your life and see the big picture. Pay attention to detail. Recognize your life isn't about you. Because what people are going to say about you will often be the influence that you leave behind to influence them in their lives long beyond the time you spend on this earth. And so build a good legacy. Remember, every stone you lay down is building a legacy. And you want to use good materials. It reminds me of the story Jesus told of the 2 men who built their houses in Matthew chapter 7. And one built it on a rock and one built it upon sand. And when you make poor choices and you set a bad example and you don't take time for your kids and you're self-centered in your life, you're building on sand. So build upon the rock, use good material, and build a strong legacy. And you'll influence people well beyond your time here on earth. Let's stand together as we pray.